On Friday at 5 o'clock, we went live for 24 hours as we raised money for Isla. Thanks to the generosity of everybody that watched and joined in, we raised over £4,000. The link is in the description if you wish to donate, but please bear in mind the raffle has obviously ended. As part of that 24-hour stream, we interviewed 16 guests, and over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be uploading each and every single one of them to this channel, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss one. Drop a like if you enjoyed it, because first up is Kieran Maguire, but I'm going to let him tell you why we got him onto this channel. It's a very interesting interview, so stick around and I hope you enjoy it.
My name's Kieran Maguire. I'm a university lecturer at Liverpool. I teach football finance, and I run the Price of Football blog and Twitter feed on all financial information to do with all clubs in all 92 and Scotland as well, and FIFA when I can be asked.
You don't have to mention the Scotland thing because I'm here. It's all right. I'm happy with the 92. And for those that don't follow Kieran on Twitter, I highly recommend it. It's a feed that I really enjoy. Even I enjoy reading about finances that's not directly West Ham as well. I was telling them earlier on the stream about your thing about Bristol City today with the wage and spending £97 of every £100 income. Things like that interest me. Hence why I've got you on. So let's talk about the West Ham finances then, because that's what the people in the live chat and watching the stream live will be interested in. So I sent you a few questions earlier to give you a rough idea what we're going to talk about, because it's quite a broad topic. But first question, West Ham obviously moved to the London Stadium to sort of compete better, if you like, and part of that was financially driven. Has it been worth it so far, do you think, financially?
To date, no. I think the club... I mean, to be fair to the club, they did reduce ticket prices from what I can see. So what they're doing is that they're selling more tickets at lower prices. So they're not getting much more money in. I think the increased capacity that's come through in the last few months will help a wee bit more. And I think there's been teething problems, and therefore sponsors are a bit wary to align themselves to West Ham and the board until those complications are dealt with. So we're not seeing any significant increase in income to date, and they're still therefore reliant on TV income as a means of sort of pushing the clubs forwards.
What's it worth so far in pound notes per season? Is there a rough figure you can throw out there for us fans?
It's worth about an extra 2 million a season.
Is that it?
That's it. Yep. If I just grab my spreadsheet here, which I've got on West Ham. Last season at the Bowling Ground, 27 million. First season at the London Stadium, 28.5 from matchday sales. So for all of the pain that people went through and the angst, it was worth £1.5 million. That's less than a one-place increase in the Premier League in terms of the prize money you get.
Wow, that does put into context a little bit. Moving on, I mean, these questions there's no flow to these questions. I just wrote down questions I think fans will be interested to hear, and there's a live chat, so you'll be able to ask Kieran questions, and hopefully you'll be able to get the answers. Slightly difficult because these are not opinions, these are factual questions. I said to you, is Karen Brady's wage, that's something that West Ham fans get a little bit umpty about, because she gets paid nearly £1 million a year, and she's also had a nice bonus for a consultancy fee recently as well. Is that similar to other people in her position or other similar clubs?
Yeah, there's quite a few chief executives who are on 1 million plus. So you've got the guy at Liverpool, he's on about 1.2. Paul Barber at Brighton, he's on 1.4. Daniel Levy, Spurs, he's on 3 million. Ed Woodward at United, he's on 4. Trying to work out what's going on at Manchester City is odd. They claim not to pay any of the directors. Perhaps they just do it because they love the club.
Yeah, I mean, the next question confused you a little bit. Sorry I never got back to you earlier because I was doing the live stream. So Tripp, to West Ham fans, is the American investor. I said to you, Tripp has loaned the club £9.5 million, I think it was, and it isn't repaid until there's a change of directors. Is this normal, or to you as a financial expert, does this suggest something?
Yeah, it's trying to work out what his motivations are. I mean, I can understand the club putting in that clause, because the last thing they want is him getting bored after a year and demanding his money back, and they've already invested that money on the park. And to be fair to the West Ham board, they have spent a lot of money on players in the last 18 months. So it's really to prevent him from throwing his toys out of the pram or getting bored and saying, "I want my money back." He appears to have lent that money interest free, unlike Gold and Sullivan.
Interesting. So, is there a prediction you care to make off the back of that, or is it a sort of wait and see what happens?
I'd wait and see. I think it's a speculative investment from his point of view. He's waiting for new potential bidders to come in, and he'll then I suspect he'll flip his stake and sell it on to somebody else. So he's hoping to sell it on at a profit, with the aim that the move to the London Stadium will increase the value of the club. So therefore, the value of his investment will increase on the back of that. We've not seen any concrete interest to date from other potential investors. But it only takes one. You've seen what's happened at Manchester City, how just one person getting involved can transform the finances of a club. There's things in favour at West Ham. First of all, it's in London, and overseas investors love London because it's the place to be. Secondly, you've got a ready-made stadium which has hosted the Olympic Games. That's got a kudos which is attached to it. So West Ham is an attractive proposition. And I think you do need, and this isn't a criticism of Gold or Sullivan necessarily, you need somebody who's prepared to take you to the next level by funding an increase in player transfer budget and also wages, so that you can compete, first of all, with Spurs and then the rest of the big six who are paying out substantially more in wages.
One thing that we were sort of told while we were moving ground is that we would make West Ham debt-free. It got changed a little bit after we moved to bank debt-free, which is, of course, true. How much debt is there still left in terms of loans?
Gold and Sullivan owed 45 million. And there's some other bits and pieces looking at here. So in total, the debts are around about 65 million. And they did take out some short-term borrowings in 2018, which appear to be sort of, they borrowed money early on in the transfer window, spent it with a view to then repaying the lender from the money that was coming from Sky over that gets drips in over the season from the TV success and the broadcasting deal. So it was 65 million, but they also had a bit of cash. So the debt is very manageable. The majority of it is to the two main owners in Gold and Sullivan. I think part of the reason why fans are a little bit uncomfortable with that is that there's many owners who will lend money to clubs interest free, and the two Davids aren't doing that, and they've taken out 10 million to date in interest, and I think the total interest clock is another 4 million at least on top of that.
Interesting. I'll ask you a bit about that in a second. But after January 2020, I believe that the 45 million repayment is due back on the 1st of January 2020. So after then, in theory, is there just the loan to Trip left, assuming West Ham don't make any more financial loans this summer?
Well, in theory, but I can't see that loan being repaid. I don't think West Ham have the resources. So I think what will happen is one of those loans which legally is due for repayment in 2020, but what I think that the two Davids will do is that they'll recycle that and they'll push back the repayment date. If they want the club to progress on the park, I think what they need to do is to hold on getting any repayment in respect of that loan until they sell the club on, if that's what they want to do.
Interesting. You mentioned there about interest. The owners charge West Ham interest on their loans. It's obviously decreased. It was slightly higher than it is now. Is this sort of normal for clubs of similar stature to West Ham?
Depends on the club. If you take a look around the EFL and in the Premier League, there's an awful lot of owners who have lent money to clubs. I mean, the guys at the Fenway Sports Group, they lend money to Liverpool, but that's at around about 2%. You got Tony Bloom at Brighton. He's lent the club 200 million. That's interest free. Dean Hoyle at Huddersfield. He lent the money interest free. Steve Gibson at Borough. So the smaller clubs, and this isn't disrespecting West Ham, but West Ham was sort of a mid-tier club. Smaller clubs than West Ham have lent money from the owners interest free. But then those clubs historically have lost money hand over fist, so they physically don't have the ability to pay interest. I think with West Ham having a reasonably long run in the Premier League, and therefore they're generating a lot of cash, what initially happened was that Gold and Sullivan charged interest on the loans, and that interest rolled up until they felt that the club was in a position to pay them, and that the money that was paid to them effectively coincided with the investment from Tripp.
Yeah, indeed it did. There's a rumour, a strong rumour, if you like, from the nose at West Ham, that West Ham have got about 30 million to spend this summer. Now, looking at the accounts from what you can see, is that about right, or does it seem a bit little to you?
I think that's low. I mean, looking at their net spend, yeah, the net spend last year was only 3 million. They did have a lot of player sales. They spent 60 million, but they recouped some. Now, if Rice goes this summer, we're talking 30 million for him. And therefore that will be added to the budget. So a lot will depend on player sales. We don't know what's happening with Arnautovic. There's potential. If one goes out, that allows some more to come in. Historically, their net spend has been around about 30 to 40 million each summer. Although when Pellegrini arrived, the net spend went up to about 70 million last summer. So it could be that the owners want to cut back on that. Alternatively, with some players leaving the club on high wages this summer, that might free up money. So I think 30 million is a bit on the low side for a club of West Ham stature. They had a reasonable season, so therefore they've got decent money coming in from prize money from the Premier League. I think you could add another 10 to 20 million on top of that 30.
Yeah, that's interesting. That the players' wage structure. One thing I like about yourself is the way you break down wage structure, football clubs, etc. You look at income in that. But obviously, you can't really compare it with the players that literally just left West Ham, like Andy Carroll, etc. But prior to all the summer transfers, what was it looking for West Ham in terms of wage structure? Is it in line with where it should be, or is it too high, etc.?
Now, I think it's sort of in that Goldilocks position of where you want it to be. UEFA say that anybody that's spending more than £70 on wages compared to their income is a cause for concern. West Ham are at 60. They've been at 60 for the last 5 or 6 years. So they've been fairly constant. They've not overextended themselves. And whilst that may cause frustration for some fans, you don't want to end up like Bolton or some other clubs who've overstretched themselves, got into financial difficulties, and then start falling through the divisions. Clubs have overspent. If you look at what happened at Villa, they got relegated. They tried to get back through overspending. It all went absolutely disastrously wrong. Aston Villa were 2 hours from liquidation. That club nearly ceased to exist this time last summer. They were very fortunate to get rescued when they were. So to give the owners some credit, I think they run a reasonably tight ship. It may not be what people want to hear, because I appreciate as a West Ham fan. I mean, I was born in Elephant and Castle, so I've got uncles who are big West Ham fans, and they said, well, we don't mind moving to the new stadium, but we expect to see West Ham splashing the cash a bit more. That hasn't necessarily materialised, but sometimes you've got to have a sort of a sensible financial structure, and that's the position at West Ham.
Fantastic. What does it look like for the future of West Ham then financially? Are we sort of set ourselves up to be in a rosy position, or is there a bumpy ride ahead?
I think they're in a very solid position. A lot depends upon the ambitions of both the current and any future owners. There is a glass ceiling at present. It's very difficult to bounce through that top six. I appreciate people say, well, what about Leicester in 2016? That was very much a one-off. It was the big clubs turning a blind eye to transfers that season, and the reason for that, because they were in the final year of a 3-year TV deal. They were waiting for more money to come through. Leicester had a fantastic year with injuries and lack of suspensions, and they won the Premier League on the back of that. I can't see that happening again. I think to break through is going to involve a lot of investment. A lot's going to depend on with West Ham fans. Are they happy each year competing for 7th to 10th in the Premier League? If they are, then happy days. And you've got the big matches each season against the other clubs from London and the big clubs from the Northwest coming down. If that's going to keep the fans happy, then fine. If the fans felt that part of the deal with Gold and Sullivan is we're giving up the bowling ground because there's a promise to push the club on to another level. We've seen what's happened with Spurs. Remember, Spurs were playing at White Hart Lane 2 years ago in front of 35,000 people, and now they're playing in the Champions League final tomorrow. If I was a West Ham fan, I might feel slightly aggrieved that West Ham aren't in, whilst not necessarily that have gone that far, at least we're competing. Wolves have come into the Premier League and they've really set a standard, I think, for the other clubs. They're talking about expanding Molineux to 50,000. They've got billionaire owners ready to bankroll them. I think a lot depends, as far as West Ham's future is concerned, on the ownership structure. If the fans are happy with Gold and Sullivan, then fine. If Gold and Sullivan are happy with the position that they are in at present, then fine. But if the fans want more, I think that you'd have to have a change of ownership with people who are at a different level of wealth. And the two owners at present, they've got wealth beyond the means of you or I could even dream of, and they have been very successful in what they've done. But I think there's a limit to the amount that they're prepared or want to stick into the club.
So domestic league-wise, let's ignore the cups a second. Domestic league-wise, do you think Sullivan and Gold are sort of pretty much taking West Ham as far as they can financially?
Yeah, West Ham are a mid-tier club. So you've got the top six, and then I think realistically you've got Wolves, Leicester, West Ham. I'm trying to think of any others.
Everton.
So Everton, yeah, absolutely. And if you think about what's happened there, you've got Everton with a new owner who's very ambitious. They're moving to a new stadium. Wolves have got Chinese owners, and Fosun as a company is worth billions. Leicester, I think Leicester are on the downslide, probably. Because the tragedy that happened with their owner, we don't know what the future lies with respect to that. And then West Ham are that fourth club, and they will need to increase the level of investment if they want to compete within that group for what we sometimes refer to as the Everton Cup, which is finishing 7th.
Okay, if you've got any questions for Kieran, put them into the live chat now, because that's my questions over and done with. I'm turning around to the live chat, and we've got a couple already from people already. Daniel John says, which club represents a better investment, Newcastle or West Ham?
I would say West Ham. Newcastle's got the advantage of being a one-club city, which is attractive. You've got St James's Park, which is right in the middle of the city, and the local population live and breathe football. But West Ham's in London, and I think people underestimate the fact that if you want to, and this is something which I think fans won't like me saying this, but what West Ham need to do is to attract more football tourists, because they spend more money. West Ham's average spend per fan is actually very, very low, because West Ham's got 52,000 season tickets, and it's got very, very few match day tickets. Whereas if you look at Liverpool only sell 26,000 season tickets a year, and the reason for that is that I work in Liverpool. Every fortnight you've got thousands of people coming in from Ireland and Tokyo and Norway and so on, and they spend an absolute fortune in the club shop, and they pay, and a match day ticket's far more expensive than a season ticket. So I think West Ham is more attractive than Newcastle. Newcastle under Mike Ashley have not invested in the playing squad. There's a lot structurally that's wrong with Newcastle, and it's not as attractive to tourists because it's not in London. So you can't go to watch a match and then go to watch a show in the evening and go to the West End and shopping and things of that nature.
Mark's got an interesting question here. Mark Inskip says, you highlighted how Derby got around FFP by selling the ground and the lease back, etc. Does the sale Upton Park and the lease of the London Stadium benefit West Ham in terms of FFP?
There was a benefit. The club did register a profit. I think the issue which does concern people in relation to the sale of the bowling ground was that the ground was sold for around about 40 million, and then very quickly thereafter, the new owners flipped it for 60 million to, I think it was Barrett Development. So, I'm surprised that when you've got people who are as smart as David Sullivan when it comes to property sales and property values. I mean, that's where he's made the majority of his money in recent years, that they allowed such a poor deal to go through. So it did help West Ham at the time. It would have qualified for FFP, but I felt that it was at a relatively low price, and I was surprised that the club didn't do better there.
Someone it says here, something Graham says, why does Kieran think that West Ham have not been targeted by a major investor in recent years, while clubs like Newcastle, Wolves and Everton, all far from London, have been approached?
Well, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. It could be that the two owners aren't actively seeking a buyer, whereas Bill Kenwright at Liverpool, he was skint. He's a theatre owner. He's not an independently wealthy man himself. Mike Ashley's been bored, and Wolves were in meltdown. I mean, Wolves were bought for about 30 or 40 million. They're in the Championship. They just got up from League One at the time. So actually, the people that bought them bought a bargain. So I think therefore the reason is that the asking price for West Ham, realistically, I think the owners would be looking for 250 to 300 million for the club. Excuse me. And that's a lot of money. You've got to therefore put the club on the market. It could be that there are people as we speak who are sort of doing a bit of tire kicking and looking at the club as a potential purchase. Perhaps they feel that the London market is saturated. Perhaps they feel that the current structure of the match day operation isn't something which they like, or perhaps they're waiting for further developments in terms of the relationship with the landlord to be resolved before they want to buy the club, because they don't know how much rent they're going to be paying. We've seen the Mayor of London be a bit awkward. The relationships between Karen Brady and LDCC isn't particularly good at present, and needs. I think both parties need to compromise on some issues. And once that's all gone through, and therefore anybody who's buying will know what's going to be happening sort of in the medium term, in the next 5 to 10 years, in terms of what West Ham are going to get from merchandise sales and catering sales and things of that nature, then it becomes a more attractive proposition.
Interesting. Do you think not owning the stadium is a part of a barrier, if you like, in selling West Ham?
It's yes and no, because the rent being paid for the stadium is so ridiculously low, is that's actually very attractive. It wouldn't put off investors in other businesses, because most companies in London are operating from rented premises, and it doesn't mean that they're unattractive to potential buyers. Also, with the nature of sort of the maintenance and the repair work, a lot of those costs are being borne by the landlord rather than the club itself. So that it's not an issue. I think it would be an issue if it was the bowling ground and it was being rented, because any new owner would be looking to expand that. I think realistically, West Ham are at sort of their expected level of capacity and interest at 60,000 to 65,000. So therefore, you don't need to expand the London Stadium any further.
Yeah, the value of West Ham, I mean, it came out the other day. West Ham was valued at around about 520 million, I think, 18th in European football. But on Karen Brady's personal website, she said that West Ham United is worth $1 billion. Do you think that is potentially an issue? I mean, what do you value West Ham United at, looking at the figures, etc.?
I don't think. Using traditional valuation methods, you say, well, what return are you going to get if I bought West Ham for £1 billion and I borrowed money at 4 or 5%, then I'm paying instantly £40 million in interest on the business which is earning 160 million. Now, £1 billion is too high unless the club can push itself to being a regular feature of the Champions League or the Europa League, and starts to generate an extra income stream from European football. Now, it's not doing it at present, and I don't think there's any sign of that happening in the short term. So I think her valuation is far too high. Realistically, I'd say West Ham, you're looking at around about the 300 million figure.
Is that all?
Well, that's 300 million pounds. It's a lot of money for a company that doesn't make a lot of profit.
Yeah, that's why I've got you on.
Yeah. What exactly are you buying? You're buying a club whose main asset, well, it doesn't own its main asset, which is the stadium. You say, well, what about the players? But if you sell the players, you've got to replace them. So as a consequence of that, therefore you say, well, the value comes from the profits it generates, and it dibbles along at 10 to 20 million pounds of profit perhaps a season. If I'm paying £1 billion, 10 to 20 million pounds worth of profit is a 1% or 2% return. It's not particularly attractive if I'm a billionaire, and you've also got that potential risk of relegation where you lose the majority of your income stream.
There was a comment you made earlier, which I sort of ignored because I had the question set out, but I want to go back to it. You said at the start that you think West Ham are missing out on sponsorship, or the London Stadium sort of obviously not had a sponsorship deal for the naming rights, etc. And you sort of hinted that you were putting it down to bad relationships between the fans and the West Ham United board. Can you expand on that a little bit, please?
Well, if I'm a sponsor, I want to go to a happy clappy club where everybody's pointing in the right direction, and it was fairly clear where there were disputes between the fan base and the board that things weren't great. There were also problems in relations between the board and LDCC. If you want to put your brand and stick that onto a club, then you've got to make sure that the club's getting positive press and positive media commentary. The reason why Liverpool are disproportionately successful in terms of sponsors compared to the number of trophies they win is they're very good at presenting this we're all Anfield together. I don't, as an outsider of West Ham, that doesn't appear to be the case. I was reading some blogs this week from West Ham trying to do a bit of background, and it appears that relationships between the club and the Supporters Association, there appear to be tensions there, and until they're resolved, I don't think it makes the club the most attractive proposition to a sponsor, and also it's presently not appearing in Europe, and European football is an incredibly attractive allure, because it's the viewing figures, whilst they're not brilliant for BT Sport, the viewing figures for the Champions League overseas are huge.
I've got one more question for you, but before I shout out mine, Gons, have you got any questions for Kieran before he disappears in a bit?
Yeah, please. Hello, Kieran. I've been absolutely fascinated and insightful listening to all of this. I do have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
We're in the West Ham world, we're constantly reminded of FFP. Now, as I understand it, there is a domestic FFP and there's a UEFA FFP. I understand that Man City are falling foul of the European version, or whatever it may be, the FIFA version. But the one that's obviously trotted out to us as West Ham fans is the domestic one. Is that something that we should be concerned about? Is that a tangible thing? Because it's always very vague.
Gonzo always says Hawaii, basically.
Right. There's two types of FFP domestically. First of all, there's there's what we call the break-even model. You're not allowed to lose more than £105 million in 3 years. Now, that's not an issue. For a Premier League club to be anywhere near that would be absolutely crazy, given the level of money that comes in. I think the one which sort of goes under the radar is that there is effectively a wage cap in the Premier League, and this is called STCC, short-term cost control. And what this says is that you cannot increase your wage bill each season by more than £7 million unless you are generating money yourself. So it's £7 million excluding any increase in the TV deal. So therefore, that's either got to come from match day. And I think with the pricing structure for season tickets at West Ham, as an outsider, they look pretty decently priced, but I can't see them going much higher. I think there'll be a lot of resistance from the fan base if that happens. So they're not going to go up. Sponsorship income we've just covered. So can you see that effectively you're limiting your annual wage rise to £7 million? Now, you are allowed to throw your profits on player transfers into that equation, and that's spread over a 3-year rolling period, and it all gets a bit nerdy. But I think that is the main constraint as far as West Ham is concerned. It's one of the, it's subsection or section 34.2, which nobody actually reads apart from geeks like me. And it does actually put a limit on how far you can go. So therefore, you can't say, right, we've got a billionaire come in, right, we're going to sign Messi, we're going to sign Neymar, we're going to pay him 500 grand a week, because you'd fall foul of those particular rules. So from West Ham's point of view, you need to get players out to get decent players in, with this constant ceiling of we can't increase the wage bill by more than 7 million unless we start to generate money from elsewhere. Therefore, extending the capacity of the stadium to getting approval to go from, now this better than I don't know what the score is. It's now at 60. Can you get it to 64? Can you get it to 66? I don't know that. Can you also get some decent sponsorship deals? Because all of that will count towards your wage target.
Okay, so thanks for explaining that. So obviously what we couldn't do is go and buy Lionel Messi, because that would burst it through. But from my understanding, you said 105 million over 3 seasons, and that's that. Yeah. So but what you could do, in essence, is buy a player each season for 30 million and pay him £7 million wages, and you wouldn't then incur the penalty, because you would be making...
Yeah.
Yeah, well, okay. That's interesting. So that would be within our budget. So when we hear maybe these things that we can't buy this one additional player, actually, realistically, £7 million a year in wages and £30 million of transfer fee, we could incur those losses on the balance sheet.
You could, but the trouble is, if you've got a new player coming in and you're paying him £7 million, that's 140 grand a week. You might have other players at the club who are on 70, 80, 90, how these guys survive on that, I don't know myself. University people, we get paid a fortune, of course. But they might have clauses in their contract that when a new player comes in, they automatically match their salary to that of the highest paid player at the club. And it's things like this which tend to go unspotted. And remember, you've got players like Declan Rice who will have come through the club this season, and he will be you will want him to sign a new contract next season, because you want him to play at the club for as long as possible. So therefore, his wages might be going from, he might have originally been on 30 grand, then it got increased to 70. Manchester United come interested, so therefore you offer him a new 5-year contract on 100 and 120. And it's that constant ratchet effect which drives up wages as a whole, which means that trying to just signing one player for £7 million is fine in isolation, but you've then got the attitude of the dressing room to deal with, and you've got players progressing and expecting pay rises to deal with at the same time as that.
Which I guess is why, allegedly, of course, we're finding that there are more and more creative schemes to make it look why some clubs have boosted their incomes. My words, not yours, of course. Just finally, I was. The Newcastle takeover was interesting. I certainly, in the West Ham world, there's been a lot of fans fawning over the fact that Newcastle might have attracted a new owner. I remember Man City going through. We heard nothing in the press at all. I remember Mark Hughes stood there with his arm around Robinho, thinking, what on earth's happening here? He couldn't believe what had happened. I also remember Trevor Birch desperately looking for a new owner for Chelsea. The next thing we knew, Ken Bates had his money. Abramovich was in. Not a sniff, nothing. Is your hunch that this Newcastle thing is sort of bona fide, or do you think that's not going to go through? There's been a lot of noise, which we don't normally hear when very, very rich benefactors take over a club.
I put it down to fake shake news. If I was making, I think that the Bin Zaden group, I think that they are trying to leverage on the fact that they are from the UAE, that he is a distant cousin of Mansour. But if you actually go through the family tree, you find that Bin Zaden's grandfather killed Mansour's grandfather 50 years ago in a dispute about something. Now, that means that if he was my cousin, I probably wouldn't be talking to him. I come from an Irish family. I've got 3,000 cousins dotted around and don't know who they are. So, I'd be a little bit cautious. It's all, as you said, the best deals are dealt with quietly, professionally, go under the radar, and you just announce it like that. Even the Glazers at United, as loathsome as they were, they did all their homework first. They built up some small stakes, and then kapow.
And of course, if I had 12 billion quid, I wouldn't be struggling to provide proof of funds for 350 million. Actually, I would just pay the 350 million without having to show my bank statements, I guess.
Yeah, and remember, Bin Laden was supposedly interested in buying Liverpool last year for 2 billion. The FSG says, well, we want a 25 million goodwill deposit as a sign of that you do of the funds, and they couldn't even raise that. So, all of these things together make me pretty wary about the nature. I've got friends who are Newcastle fans. They're desperate to get rid of Ashley. Ashley's isn't as bad as people make him out to be. He's lent more money to Newcastle than Gold and Sullivan have lent to West Ham, and he's charged no interest. So, for all his faults, and he is many, he's actually been financially pretty generous to that club.
Fantastic! Great interview. Great interview. Thank you so much.
Done, Gonzo.
Yeah, brilliant. Really enjoyed that.
You've touched on it, and how important is it to West Ham? This summer, we've announced new sponsorship deals with Umbro and now Betway. And the Betway's one's believed to be the biggest one outside the top six. How crucial is it to West Ham to keep up, sort of being the best of the rest in terms of sponsorship deals, etc., for the financial outlook for the club?
Absolutely critical. Remember, I was telling you about this wage cap. Well, if they got new deals with Umbro, which effectively is Nike, isn't it? I mean, it's owned by Nike. If they've got deals with Umbro and Betway, which are greater than those of Leicester and Wolves and Everton and Newcastle, which are your peer group, I think in the 7th to 10th, 11th sort of bracket, then it's absolutely essential that you're ahead of the game and you're ahead of them. I've spoken to chief executives of some other clubs, and they say actually trying to get a shirt sponsorship deal over the line when you are a club which isn't one of the big six is really tough, because what the sponsors have a habit of doing is they say, well, you go in as West Ham, you say, well, we want 12 million a year for shirt sponsorship, and they'll turn around to you and say, well, Everton will do it for 9. And then when they go to Everton, they say, okay, Everton say, we'll do it for 9. And they say, well, hold on, Newcastle will do it for 7. And there's a lot of driving the price down because the sponsors actually don't particularly care, because as far as they're concerned, there's 20 teams in the Premier League. They know which 6 are going to be on most often. And then the other 14, it tends to be much of a muchness in terms of how often they're on the telly.
Did you just say Umbro are owned by Nike?
Yeah.
What? I never knew that.
I've learned so much.
You said, I didn't know that.
Now, they might have sold them again, but they definitely were bought by Nike a few years ago.
Well, you learn something on every stream you do, don't you?
I might be wrong. I mean, Umbro, they might have been bought out since, but they certainly were acquired by Nike a good few years ago.
Fantastic. Well, Kieran, I'd just like to say a massive thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. You don't even support West Ham. You've given up your time to come on the live stream, chat to us, take questions from everybody. And I have to say, this has probably been one of the most fascinating videos we've done. This little snippet here has been one of my favorite videos. Gonzo will tell you, I like my stats, I like my figures, etc. So listening to you talk about it, I'm in heaven sitting here listening to all this. It shaves me listening to Gonzo talk about FFP not counting. I like a guy that comes on and said it does count. I appreciate that. So Kieran, thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure. And hopefully,
welcome.
Thank you.
Good luck with the show.
Thank you. Take care.
Great job.
You can now purchase a season ticket for the Hammers Chat boats for the 2019-20 season. Prices start from £60 and includes entry to all boats events that we may have, including cup games and friendlies at the London Stadium next season. Please get in touch via email at hammerschat@gmail.com or via Twitter, hammers_chat. All details are in the description below. Get in touch and we'll see you next season.